Hello and welcome to How to Be a Better DM. My name is Tanner Wayland, and I'm going to help you learn how to have a great time playing and directing D&D while, improving your skills and managing it all better, because that's kind of the name of the game. And there's kind of a tool that a lot of DMs use that I'm going to be talking about today. It's less of a tool and more of a story, I don't know, tool, I guess you could say. Deus Ex Machina. Uh, any of you that are familiar with that term, uh, it's it's kind of a typical story thing that you'll like. I don't want to call it a crutch. It's a story tool that is used when the protagonists of a story are kind of in over their heads, and the Deus Ex Machina of it all is something outside of them, outside of the protagonists, comes in and saves them at the last minute. For example, there's always the joke in Lord of the Rings of like, oh, the eagles come and just bring them right to Mordor, or the eagles come out of nowhere, that kind of thing. Or it's like, okay, the party's in over their heads, and suddenly an NPC who you would never think of this, but they decide to follow the party, and then they're there helping, and they stop the killing blow on one of the characters. Or, just as your party is about to be executed, an army comes into the city. Or the priest in your party, is praying to their god, and all of a sudden they're suffused with power, and they have a killer blow move that just blows away enemies, and it's all cinematic. And it's also a little, it's kind of one of those story tools that's both overwhelming and underwhelming. It's overwhelming in the way that typically players are saved in big miraculous kind of ways, right? Or, it's, oh, they couldn't see it coming. But then it's underwhelming in the way that it doesn't feel like the characters have a lot of agency, or rather that they had a lot of impact in solving their own problems. And so I want to talk about that today, about how you can use a Deus Ex Machina kind of save the party story beat, but not do some of the negatives to the story that comes with that, right? But first off, let's talk about pros and cons, just clear cut. I mentioned already with the cons that it doesn't always feel earned, right? If the big, powerful captain of the guards rushes in and saves your butt, then, that's not you who did that. It also feels a little bit railroady, which, of course, there are campaigns, as we've discussed before. There are campaigns where railroading is totally fitting, but it does feel like that, where it's like, oh, I was going to try something else, but then the DM was like, oh, you don't have a hold of this. Railroad in this solution, and then, of course, it can make some players feel powerless, or conversely, they feel like the stakes aren't that huge. I find that a lot of times the way that Deus Ex Machina is misused, whether it's like a big literal god coming in or saving them, or just a little help here that kind of gets them out of a tight place. A lot of the way it's used is to save a player's life. That's one of the strengths, right? If a player is really connected to their character, or maybe they've had a few characters die in quick succession, saving them last minute is great. And same for if you're like, oh, for this story, a party wipe would just not be what I'm looking for. Deus Ex Machina can help there, but also if you do it often enough, anytime a player is just about to die, then they're not fools. They can understand what's going on. They understand that you are kind of playing with kitty gloves with them, right? And you don't want that, because you want them to feel that there's stakes, that there are consequences, and also it helps to have a more dramatic story if there is. But so it's kind of like a double-edged sword there. But the other, edge of that sword, the pros, is aside from saving your character or your party's lives, you get an opportunity to kind of showcase a cool plot moment, right? If you have a really cool character that they've heard about all this time and you've been thinking about how to introduce it, it's like, oh, the hero of the country. Um, oh, I plan on having them meet this NPC at some point. What a wonderful moment if it's like this barbarian looking guy swings in and he's draped in, in lion furs, and he saves the party and they're like, oh my goodness, thank you. Well, what's your name? And it's the hero. It's the hero they've been hearing about since, session one. And he's right there and he's saving them. That's a cool plot beat. It's also a cool way to introduce a character. It also is like, I mentioned an example of like, oh, you're about to be executed. An army comes into the city. Deus Ex Machina can be a nice way to move the story along, because if the party is kind of slow to action, or, maybe you wrote a story that feels a little out of their depth, and you kind of are like, man, they're spending a lot of time trying to figure this out because the barrier to entry, so to speak, is really high, and they know that, and they're over planning, and they're, or they approached a plan and it's falling apart because of a lot of bad rolls. And you're like, okay, I don't want to kill them right now, but I don't have like a great other plot point. Then Deus Ex Machina getting them saved with, oh, a war got announced, and and there's an army coming in, and a spy comes and saves them. That kind of stuff can be a nice way to move the story along. And it can also postpone a conflict with like the big bad. If you're like, hey, I want to introduce them to the big bad while they're super underleveled, but I don't want them to actually like try and like fight him, but like I want them to get intimidated. A Deus Ex Machina right there, someone comes in and is like, hey, don't kill him or else I'll kill you. And we're on equal terms, big bad. Whatever it is, you can postpone that big conflict and kind of give them a sense of dread without actually having them fully deal with the situation. And of course, as always, I think the biggest reason or way that people use Deus Ex Machina is, a plot hole, like, or a dead end, honestly, is like, they're like, oh man, this party's been stuck in the city forever and they're just kind of stuck, and I'm just going to throw them a huge bone, right? I'm going to kind of deliver the enemy on a silver platter, or whatever else. And so these are some of the pros and cons that, at least that I've seen in my time playing, and also just in stories in general. And I didn't mention this at the start, but a lot of writers have, they look down on any kind of Deus Ex Machina because it does feel like you're lowering the stakes, and you're also taking the power out of the protagonist's hands. But like, there's a reason people know about it. It's because it's used often, because it's necessary. So don't just think like, hey, I'm never going to use it. Know that you will use it in various ways, even if you don't think you are. But let's try and, this next part of the discussion is, how can we do it in a way that decreases the cons enough that it's a tool that, you can use. Now, first part of that discussion is acknowledging you don't want to use it super often. Do it rarely. Do it when it has the most punch, right? Like, for example, I mentioned that like, hey, people do it too often when characters are about to die. Do not save their lives willy-nilly all the time. And do not try and get them out of, a situation where they've rolled badly all the time. Plan some failure states that, of course, they can actually work out of and find solutions through. Accept that, acknowledge it, and embrace it. But then occasionally keep your eye out for, okay, when do I want to emphasize the failure by being like, hey, no, yeah, you don't just get captured, you're going to get killed. And then you get saved. That's, if you can like train your eye to see, to find most of the opportunities for like where you can turn failure into a different opportunity, but then occasionally do a Deus Ex Machina to move the story ahead while also protecting their lives. You kind of have to do a 10-to-1 ratio there, right? Where, okay, every 10 times that, yeah, they fail something, but, I provide other routes, or, yeah, they fail, but it's something they can come back from. For every 9 of those, you can do one time where you're just like, hey, I'm going to epically save them, and kind of direct them to a cool NPC or the next part of the story or whatever with a Deus Ex Machina. So that's kind of key, is do it rarely, first and foremost. And when you do it, I think that an important thing is to realize that you can save them, but you should still make it feel earned in some ways, right? For example, if they went out of their way to help someone earlier in the story, that person could be the person who comes in, even if it's a little waif on the street. Suddenly, the waif's like, hey, hello, sir, you helped me earlier and I've got a key for you to escape, or something like that, right? Or, oh man, that old man on the road that you helped earlier, turns out he's the mayor, and he can, he's got quite the sway to get the town guard to come help you when you're fighting the bandits. Those are situations where it's like, yeah, you're getting saved, but technically the party kind of worked earlier to develop that connection and to make it so that that person wants to come help them, right? So you've got to kind of think that way, where you're like, okay, if it's a smaller Deus Ex Machina, I got to make it feel a little bit more earned, and sometimes even the bigger ones. But speaking about that, big versus small, I honestly think there shouldn't be any medium, like big saves like this, out of the blue saves. It should either be super huge, like, oh my goodness, like some angelic beings descend from the heavens to save your party, and blast everything in sight. Or conversely, it should be as small as, like I mentioned, a friendly hand passes a key through the bars to you. Either way, don't do something medium. Either make it super subtle or just overblown, because you're doing this rarely, right? So you either want to kind of cover up that you're doing it, or do it so big that the players are like, hey, I don't even care that I had to be saved, because that was sick. And you won't get that same thing if you just do medium, where it's like, oh, they can tell they've been saved, but like it wasn't so miraculous or cool to make it feel worth it, you know? But, another way to do it is, while feeling earned in the past tense, like, oh, you earned it by how you've acted before. That's great. And another way to do it is, after they've been saved, give them a task right away, right? They're just about to be hanged. And then, kind of Jack Sparrow-esque, someone comes in and saves you from being hanged. And then suddenly the person that saved you is like, okay, you need to come on my ship. We're doing this thing. If you give them a task right away, then it's like, oh, they saved you because they needed you, right? It wasn't just them saving you just because, like, oh yeah, we thought we'd save you because I'm powerful and you're not. They saved you for a higher purpose, so to speak, or because of your particular set of skills, or they just need some helping hands. Make them feel useful right after the fact, to kind of tone down the fact that they were not useful just barely. And just as some ideas, like I've mentioned characters, you can also do Deus Ex Machina with environmental factors, right? Like you're fighting the big bad, or one of his minions, you're getting owned, and then suddenly it's like, oh, you're in a dungeon and the room starts collapsing. And suddenly, both you and the enemies have a lot more to think about than just fighting each other. That's an environmental way in which, you can split up or save the party for a moment, let them recuperate, and then they can, find a different path away and approach it from different solutions / with a little bit more rest. in fighting that mid boss or whatever, right? There are environmental ways to do this, as well as, a character coming in. So you can be creative with it. You can save characters while, kind of disguising a little bit as well. And then of course, as I mentioned before, it's always great to think on multiple levels. It's like, okay, if I'm going to just save them out of the blue, let's not just save them and then have it be like, okay, continue on your merry way. Like, turn it into a plot point. Turn it into the springboard that makes them go on to the next leg of their adventure, right? Where they get saved and they join an organization that gives them answers and then gives them quests for the next part. Or they get saved and they're like, oh my goodness, we just learned through the betrayal that we needed to be saved from that everything's wrong. And now we know what we need to do. And this person who just helped us or whatever, like, we know exactly what we need to do next. You never want to save them and just kind of leave them in the same situation that they've been in. And I think that that's what makes Deus Ex Machina kind of story elements and plot points so interesting, because while we try and avoid it and we want the players to feel like they've earned everything that they've done, I mean, hey, we all know that life, I mean, our own lives have a lot of twists and turns. There's a lot of ways in which we've gotten help, even if we don't acknowledge it. But like, those moments of help also turn into moments of change and pivoting and everything. And I think that can be true in D&D as well. So think about your story. Think about if you've done this, especially if you're looking, I mentioned this before earlier in the episode. If you're looking for, hey, do I do this? Look at any time a character has been about to die and ask yourself, like, oh, have they just gotten lucky and like killed something? Or ask if you've kind of like padded the numbers a little bit. Or if you've introduced another element into the story right then to save them. And then you'll be able to see your own pattern and be like, okay, was I doing that? Was I trying to be creative with that saving grace that I threw their way? Or was I trying to, or was I just kind of going with the flow and doing something basic and maybe it just took the edge off of my campaign a little bit? Hopefully that's more of a constructive criticism moment for you, because I think that this is a really cool opportunity for you to reevaluate how you make epic conflict and how you react to players' failures. So yeah, I hope that you get out there and really think about this in your own gameplay style, and also do it rarely, but plan in the near future how you could do it more purposefully rather than as a reaction to a player's mistakes. And maybe even plan something ahead of time so that if players do end up in kind of a sticky situation, you don't have to like come up with a random NPC who just swoops in and saves them. Instead, you're like, oh, I know where the story should be going and what would be interesting, and I'm going to make it happen this way. And if you plan it ahead, then it'll have a much greater impact and your players will enjoy it better. I hope that you enjoyed this discussion and that it's useful in your campaigns and in your games. But until next time, let's roll initiative.
Brought to you by Session Zero Studios. For more information, visit sessionzerostudios.com.